The fracking revolution has changed the energy business over the last decade, moving us from peak oil to what some are calling an oil glut. And joining us to discuss what the future of energy and fossil fuels holds is Lord John Browne, the former CEO of BP and the author of the new book, Make, Think, Imagine, Engineering the Future Civilization. So let's talk about fossil fuels and climate change. Of course, between the Amazon, major hurricanes, warmest July on record, been a big talking point for politicians, citizens, some in the market. When you look at the role that fossil fuels you think it might play in future decades, kind of where does it fit in with a climate debate that's, I would say, veering much more towards consensus that we need to do something?
So I've been at this for a quarter century saying we've got to do something about climate change in the face of using fossil fuels. It was started in '97 and carried on even when I was running BP. So the fact is that we have to use fossil fuels. There is not a sufficient replacement for it. And right now, fossil fuels are 85% of the world's energy. So we need to take very seriously our ability to decarbonize the hydrocarbons, capture the CO2 and do something with it, as well as build on renewables and things like that, which will build, but they can't take the role of hydrocarbons. So we have all the technology to do that available today.
So yes, I'm not a scientist, layperson. What exactly does decarbonizing our current fossil fuel usage?
When we burn oil or burn gas, it produces carbon dioxide, and that's a greenhouse gas. So we capture it and we store it. We put it underground and we store it forever. Or else we make something with it. You can make tiles, you can make cement, you can do all sorts of things, and you just need to get it done. The problem with this is the engineering processes are all available, but they're too expensive. And there's one rule in life which is true, which is the more you do of something, the cheaper it becomes. And so if you push this out and you roll it out, it eventually gets cheap to be able to do it. But you need an incentive to do that. So we have the technology, we now need the policy to do that. And that's why I continuously call for a tax on carbon, which makes it cheaper for people to bury it than to let it in the atmosphere.
So listening to you and reading what you've been writing, at one hand, it makes me optimistic. Okay, there's a solution, there's some technology out there, but the other hand, it seems so daunting. Who is the we that is going to do this? Where does the political capital and the business community have to stand to make this a reality?
So we as us, of course, and we've wasted about 25 years in the face of clear and present danger, doing very little. So we, I think, are being affected by the weather, the extreme weather.
But we the people, or we like BP?
No,
like, does a company need to do this? Is it
we all need
citizens?
to do it. We've got to push our politicians. And the more we get extreme weather, probably may or may not be related, but the more we get extreme weather, the more people get concerned and they say we need to do something about it. And that's where we push legislatures to enact laws to tax. That's what we've got to do. And send the money back. It's not a regressive tax. The idea is you tax carbon, send it back to the population, minus a little bit for research.
So speaking about politicians working legislatively, here in the United States, AOC has proposed a Green New Deal. A couple of Democratic candidates that are running for president have essentially picked it up. Do you think that these climate proposals that you've been hearing are too ambitious, or are they becoming necessary going forward?
Well, I think they're necessary. They probably are a bit too ambitious because timescales are long and they're not good things to talk about. You know, it just takes time to change infrastructure. You know, imagine what we have to do to lay a new pipe in a street in New York City or London. It's very complicated. We have to do that millions of times over to change the way we're doing things. So it takes time. But it can be done and it must be done.
Now, in the book, you write about everyone being an engineer. And to me, that made me think of the debate we're having here in the States about STEM education, right? Are enough kids learning science and math, things like that? When you think of being an engineer, I mean, what does that mean to you? You know, some people will say, I want to be scientific, but it's essentially using, you know, the scientific process for anything you're doing, right? So what is it?
Engineering is very special. It sits in the middle between the method of discovery, what happens in a laboratory and what happens in a market. And it has two faces, and it's looking at both sides at once, and it's saying we need to take useful discoveries and make them into great products for the future. And that's what engineers do. As to what people do, I think it's a very human desire to make things. Whether that's in the kitchen, whether it's in the garden, whether it's in the garage, or whether it's building a great telescope to launch 1 million miles away from Earth at the Goddard Space Center to look at the beginning of time. So everybody wants to make something. And that's why we attach a lot of importance to manufacturing. And when it closes down, we feel slightly hurt about it because it's a very basic human urge. And that's what I mean when everyone's an engineer.
Before we let you go, I just want to ask you about Brexit. UK lawmakers have voted to block a no-deal Brexit. I know you're not a forecaster and a politician, but as somebody who's been a part of the British community, business and otherwise, what do you think over here in the U.S. in the media that we get wrong?
I think the most important thing to remember is the United Kingdom does not have a written constitution. We do not. The only thing we have is the Queen, who in the end passes laws. So because we don't have a constitution written, it's very difficult to predict what is happening when you're right at the edge of things that have never been done before. So that's why people get this wrong, because the rules are being made up as we go along. So right now we have a bill which is going through Parliament. It's done in the House of Commons, going to the House of Lords, to prevent a no-deal Brexit. And everybody's saying that has to be passed and signed into law by the Queen before anyone will talk about an election or anything for the future. This is a new turn of events. Let's see what happens in the next few days.
It's been 3 years, 3.5 years at this point.
3
Yeah.
years. Someone said, well, isn't it confusing 2 days? I said, just 3 years of great confusion. And of course, the impact on business is very significant because the uncertainty stakes are very, very high.
Yeah, indeed. All right, the book is called Make, Think, Imagine, Engineering, the Future Civilization. Former BP CEO, Lord John Browne, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.